Hello, family. Welcome back to Faith Unfiltered. I'm so happy to be speaking to you again. I know it's been over 7 months since our very last episode, which was actually our first episode, which sounds very bad. And yeah, life got real. And to be honest, during that time, I was very burnt out. I was confused. And at one point, I even thought about giving up on the very things that I even prayed for. And I'm sure a lot of us can relate to that feeling. You know, the prayers that you poured out start to feel like you're hitting an actual wall, right? It feels like God is distant. It sometimes feels like your very answered prayers are the source of your exhaustion. And for a very long time, that's how I felt. But during this very season, that's where God met me, as He always does. And when He met me during this season, He didn't meet me with all the answers. He literally just met me with one clear step, and that step was enough for me to start moving forward. So, today I want to have a very real conversation with you about suffering. And I'm not doing it from a point of preaching, but it's just me sharing what I've learned and why God allows it, right? How He shows up in the middle of it. Now, before we even go into suffering itself, we need to understand that understand about suffering in a fallen world. We need to start with the basics. Pain isn't part of God's original plan, right? When we read the book of Genesis, it tells us that the world was made perfect. It was made peaceful. It was made joyful without tears. But when sin entered the world became broken, right? And so suffering is not God's punishment. I think a lot of people, when we face challenges, we tend to think that, oh my gosh, God is literally punishing me for this thing that I'm facing right now. But the truth of the matter is, suffering is not God's punishment. It's literally just the result of living in a fallen world. But the beauty of it is that even in our brokenness, God uses it to shape us, you know? And for me, like I said earlier on, the reason I was not uploading on, our YouTube channel is because I felt burnt out. And the burnt out during, these couple of seasons was my season of brokenness. I felt like I was carrying too much. School, pageantry, ministry, my personal goals. At some point, I wanted to quit on things that I prayed very hard for, things that I literally would spend months and months in prayer for. I was ready to give up. Because I honestly didn't understand, why would God allow me to go through this? Like, I questioned God a lot. I'm like, why me? Like, why am I going through this? But I remember one time I was in prayer and He spoke to me. And when He spoke to me, He didn't speak to me with all the answers that I wanted or would have loved to get, but with literally one step. And that one step was just to do the first thing. And the first step reminded me that He is still with me, even in the brokenness. And the first step was actually coming here to the studio and filming this podcast. So, why does God allow suffering? Why do we suffer when we are Christians and believe in God? The truth of the matter is, suffering shapes us, right? Suffering doesn't just happen to make life miserable. We don't suffer so that our lives may be miserable and God is just looking at us there while we are in our misery. God uses suffering to grow us, right? When we look at James 1, verse 2 to 4, it talks about how trials produce perseverance. Because growth rarely comes from comfort. And even when you look in the world, right, business people, they didn't get to be billionaires, millionaires from comfort. Growth does not come from comfort. It comes from the moments that really, really stretch us and put us through it. And also me, during my season, I didn't feel joyful. Like, I felt so exhausted. But obedience is the first step God gave me to build my faith muscles, right? And once I was obedient to God's word, I started to pray differently. I started to worship differently. And I learned to lean on Him even when I didn't have the energy to do so. Because the truth is that sometimes you really just don't have the energy and the capacity to lean on God, right? Because most of the things that you want to see, they're not happening in the physical. But because of the obedience that I took, right, in the step that He gave me, I started to lean on Him in everything that I did. And it reminded me so much of David. In the Psalms, he wrote songs of hope when he was literally hiding in caves. So sometimes our trials are literally training ground for faith, right? And what I love about David is that even in these Psalms, when he was speaking, he would start with, why me? Like, God, why me? But he would end with, but I trust you. And that has just been me, right? I would go into prayer and I'm like, God, why me? Why am I the one to go through this? But at the end of that, I go like, you know what, God? I trust you. I trust your plan. I trust your will for my life. And so I want you to think about a time, right, where you felt very stretched. How did that season shape you? Because the truth is that every season we face, right, it literally shapes us. How did God use it in ways that you didn't understand at that time? And something that God revealed to me during my time of struggling, and obviously as I was sitting in church and listening to my pastor, is that suffering actually reveals God's glory. So here's a point I want you to really sit with, right? Wherever you are, I want you to sit and ponder on this, that suffering can reveal God's glory. In the book of John 9, Jesus heals the man born blind, right? And he says his suffering was not punishment. It was God's work. It was so God's works could be displayed. And so sometimes the pain that we go through on a daily basis, it becomes a platform for God to show his power and his love. And for me, to be honest, like I said, and I keep repeating this season because it was one of the longest seasons I've been in. You know, the seasons of being exhausted, being burnt out. It was one of the longest seasons of suffering personally that I've been through, right? And I remember when I was going through this, I had very close people that I could share what I'm going through with, right? I had my cousin Sedi, I had my pastor, Reverend Giannis, I had my best friend Gokezo, and every time that I had these conversations with them, it literally brought encouragement. And so, and not encouragement just for me, because they did encourage me quite a lot, but it also brought encouragement for them, right? Because God used my struggle to encourage others. And so, even in times when we feel weak or we feel broken, God can use our story to shine his light, you know? And even through these past couple of months, I've always sat with the fact that God is with me through it, right? I was going through it, but I knew that God is going through it with me. He says in the book of Isaiah 43, verse 2, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you. I want us to notice how it says, when you pass through the waters. It doesn't say if you pass through the waters, because suffering, we were never promised a life without suffering, right? We are going to face suffering. And there were times or there were nights where I would want to cry myself to bed and I was overwhelmed, I was tired. But even in those moments, I felt him. And I didn't feel him like a very loud voice. No, I felt a whisper of peace and I knew he was there for me. It was enough for me to know that I was not alone. I've never been alone. You're also not alone. In anything that you go through as a Christian, as a child of God, you can never, ever, ever be alone. And it was enough to give me strength to take the next step, you know? Just like how Paul worshipped in prison and Daniel prayed in the lion's den, we can trust that God doesn't leave us when we need him. We can really trust that God doesn't leave us in the middle of the fire. And so if you are somebody who is currently in, a very hard season, I want you to pause, even this video. I want you to pause it a little bit and I want you to ask God to give you just one step. You don't need to know the whole story of how God is going to fix it for you. You just need that one step, that one thing that you can do today, that you can do right now, and trust him to guide you with the next. And that is me right now. I'm in a place where I'm really trusting God to guide me with the next step, because only he knows where I'm going. One thing I love about God is that God sees the bigger picture, right? We don't see the bigger picture. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, the next day, but he does. And so why can't we trust him when he knows the end from the beginning? Why can't we trust him with our lives and to give us direction, right? And then one last thing that I want to speak on is finding hope in suffering. Even when suffering doesn't make sense, hope is always available. And that's what I love about being a child of God, is that hope is always available. As children of God, we can never get to a point where we are hopeless, where we are just like, I will not be able to get out of the situation, because you know that you're a child of God. You are truly a child of God and you can get out of any situation with him. The book of Romans 8, verse 29, actually, it reminds us that God works all things together for good. And sometimes, like I said, we can't see the full picture, but He can. God can see the full picture. And so, even for me, I may not have understood every reason for the seasons that I've been through, the seasons of struggle, but I see the first step that God gives. And I want to remain on this thing of the first step because a lot of times when we go into prayer and when we want to hear from God, when we want God to provide, when we want God to bring healing, we want a whole roadmap of how He's going to do it. We literally want a whole roadmap. But the truth of the matter is, only He knows the bigger picture. We can't. We can't see the bigger picture. So ask God for that very first step. I can promise you guys that that very first step that I asked God for is the reason I'm here filming this podcast after 7 whole months because I asked for that first step. Because that step that I'm speaking about, it leads to growth. That first step that I'm speaking about, it leads to healing and it eventually leads to joy. I was having a conversation with my best friend a while back, and I was just like, yeah, I'm going through this. I can acknowledge that this is going wrong in my life, but for some reason, I am so joyful. Like, I'm just so happy. And that is because the peace of God rests in me. So, that very step that you're going to ask God for today is going to lead to growth, it's going to lead to healing, and it's going to lead to joy. And that's why we keep going even when the pain is real. I'm not going to sit here and try to invalidate anyone's pain, anyone's struggles, right? There are people that might look at, this video and go like, oh yeah, you were just going through a season of burnout, of exhaustion. I was going through something worse. I'm not invalidating your pain. Your pain is real, but we keep going because we know that God is with us. We know that God is with us and He's always with us. So even after this video, go into prayer and ask God for that very step, that one step. And I promise you, once you take that step, He will start to reveal more steps that you need to take. So that is it for today's episode, why God allows suffering, shared real and unfiltered. I hope it encourages you to see that suffering isn't wasted. Your suffering, your struggles, they're not wasted. God uses it to shape us, to display His glory, and also to remind us, rather, that He's always with us. And if this episode spoke to you, share it with someone, right, who might need hope today. Because there's always somebody out there that really does need hope. There's somebody out there that really does need to hear this. So share it with them. Take a moment this week as well to reflect on your season of struggle and ask God to reveal the first step He wants you to take. Thank you so much for sitting with me today. I know it's been super long. It's been a long wait, right, since the last episode. And I'm so grateful that you guys are still here. I'm grateful for everybody who's watching this. And until next time, remember your pain has purpose and God is not done with your story. Remember, every single week on a Wednesday, we'll be uploading a video. And this is a promise. I know I said that the last time and it didn't happen. This is a promise. So every single Wednesday, you need to be here. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone. See you guys next week. Bye.